Making land bases sexy again in today's episode of the Playing with Power podcast. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Playing with Power podcast, the podcast where we talk about all things CEDH, EDH, and Magic the Gathering. I am your host, Ryan.
And I am your host, Alex. And today we're going to be talking about how to begin playing CEDH on a budget. We all know, especially our wallets, how expensive Eternal formats can be. Also, we have ruthlessly searched through Scryfall, hoping that we could find a replacement for a demonic tutor. Today we're going to go over all of those cards and how you can start powering up your decks without powering down your wallet.
Oh, that is so true. Powering down the wallet, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So before we go any further, I want to talk quickly about our sponsors. They are TCG Player, Dragon Shield, and support from viewers and listeners like you over on Patreon. If you're looking to get the cards and you're not looking to go to your local game store to do so, give TCG Player a try for the best prices on the internet. When you receive them, make sure to protect them with Dragon Shield accessories, just like PWP does to protect all of our own personal collections. After that, take those cards for a spin during our webcam leagues, tournaments, and Patreon days over on our Patreon and Patreon Discord. You get all kinds of benefits for your direct support. And also wanted to make a special mention that our merchandise store is back. We really didn't like the quality of our last store, so we actually took it down. We did some research and found a really great new provider that provides much higher quality merchandise for everyone. The merchandise is much better in our opinion, and we are adding new designs all the time, so go take a look, and all of the links for these will be in the description below.
Our Patreon shout out is Michael Myers.
Thanks, Michael Myers. Really appreciate all the Halloween movies you have done. And I'm sure you haven't heard that joke a million times. But
Just a couple. Just a couple.
Once again, I'm super creative and I'm the most cleverest person on the world. No, never mind. Anyway. Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and dive into our topic, which today is CEDH on a budget. Now, for all of those listeners that have listened to us in the past, over a couple episodes ago, we talked specifically about getting into CEDH. And the one thing that we specifically excluded from that episode was budget considerations. We didn't want budget to be the consideration for what deck you did or did not try out. And today we want to bridge that gap. We actually want to talk about CEDH specifically on a budget today.
Ryan, what is a budget? Do you know what a budget is?
I mean, no.
No?
You should look at my bank account. It looks horrible. Yeah, obviously, I have no idea what a budget is.
Right? It's so interesting when I think about really what a budget was for me starting in EDH. It was what cards I had around. It wasn't, I'm going to go find new cards. It was, what's in this old box of cards that have been rotated out of standard, right? And what does that look like? Especially because I want to play with my friends who were really into it at the time. I don't know. What was your budget starting off with EDH?
So obviously, depending upon how I started off and how other people will start off is widely varied. You know, everyone starts from different economical standpoints. They start from different socio standpoints, like, hey, what does the social order look like? What does their demographics and geographic locations look like? And that can play such a wide factor when you're talking about things like budget. Specifically, what I want to kind of put in as our barriers or ranges here today is kind of a narrow range. I understand that people are going to say, I can't believe you think that this number is budget. That's not budget at all. That's super expensive. But it's different things for different people. And we have to set some sort of boundary or limits on this to get at least an idea of what we can work with. Now, that's not to say that you can't go below or you can't go above, but as a general range, I want to put the budgets between $100 US and $500 US. That's kind of what I'm thinking.
Yeah, and I think that's fair, considering a lot of commanders are going to be like the bulk of that budget, right? When you're first making that first deck. My first EDH deck was Selvala, and since then, Savala till I die.
Not just always, always Savala.
Right? And I opened Savala in a conspiracy pack, and I was like, "Oh, this is really cool. I like this elf commander thing." And someone was like, "Do you know how like awesome Savala can be?" And I was like, "No." And like, "Yeah, play my deck." And I was like, "Great." And I played it, and I was like, "Turn 3 is amazing." But I didn't have the money for Mox Diamond or Mana Crypt. And at the time, Mana Crypt hadn't had a reprint in years. And so, seeing that would take that card at that time was like $200. And so that was really, really tough for me. And at the game store that I played at, they didn't allow proxies. And that was really, really hard for me because that's where I played Magic. And so that was like a big thing. And so I developed strategies specifically around Savala, and they used cards like Realm Seekers, which is an amazing card, right? Hey, 2020 turn 3 is not bad.
It's really good, actually.
And it was just like using these like strategies to help me, but also use cards that were very inexpensive. Cards in that first Savala brew was like Lurking Predators, and like that was really, really good. And my friends were upset because they were not playing anything competitive, and Savala just happened to be really good at making mana and allowing me to play these really awesome cards very fast. And I got addicted. I can't know what happened.
One of the things that I definitely think was a factor for this guideline of this range, if you will, is the idea that, like I said, not everyone's going to agree on what budget is, and we're not going to say hard $100 or hard $500. When early on, back in 2020, I would say, we put out a video and we said, hey, this particular deck is a budget deck. It's only $500. And first of all, Mitch from the Commander's Quarters has ruined this because he has built fantastic, wonderful, very good, very powerful, fun decks on crazy low budgets. And so what he has done is somehow simultaneously set the bar so low while setting the bar so high at the same time. And that makes things very difficult because for all intents and purposes in that particular pod, that $500 deck was doing real work against decks that were $5,000 and $7,000 and insane amounts of money. So yes, $500 was budget. We're not saying that everyone else should agree with what that budget is. It was actually those types of comments that spurred us into action to say, okay, well, how low can we get this budget? A common, kind of thing around the internet is kind of like usually 500 is where you can really get into CEDH without really sacrificing too much. We said, how low can we bring that? And we actually found that $100 budget decks can still kind of compete at the CEDH tables too. It was really when you started to get down below that $100 that things really started to suffer. You had to make some really suboptimal choices. So $100 to $500, that's what I think the guidelines are going to be today.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Zach's Eureka budget deck is amazing. It's
very good.
Yeah.
It's very good.
Yeah, that's one of those, there is so many cards that you have in Commander, there's like 21,000 unique cards that you can choose from. And a lot of those cards are under $5. And so it's just a matter of finding what is going to be the card for you to make your deck more competitive, and also make your wallet not lighter.
I think also an important thing to note is that it really provides a real tent pole to our community. A lot of people on the outside looking in say, I can't get into CEDH. I've seen these decks. They're $10,000. I can't spend that money on 100 cards. And we get that. So what's been really, really important is providing the idea that, hey, it doesn't have to be $10,000. It doesn't have to be $5,000. It could be $100. It could be these low things. So please don't think that the only way you can get into CEDH, if your place isn't pro proxy or anything like that, is to spend this egregious amounts of money, the amount of a vehicle, in some places and in some cases. you can absolutely start playing and enjoying this game and competing at these pods with, you know, more limited budgets. So let's talk about a couple of other guidelines here. The reason that we're putting all these parameters on this is because we really want to try and give people the idea of a frame of what we can describe budget is, because it is so relative. You know, like I said with Mitch with the Commander's Quarters, he makes great decks, but they're extreme budgets and stuff like that. And if we don't put these parameters in here, it'll be all over the place. So that's the only reason we're doing this. So a couple of the guidelines we wanted to kind of lay out tonight for getting into this is, number one, we are not considering proxies at all in this discussion. I see this come up in topics all the time on the internet. Hey, I'm starting out in CEDH and I have a budget of $800, or I got $1,000, or what should be my first upgrade, you know, when piloting this deck? Should I get a Mox Diamond or an LED or something like that? And inevitably what happens in every single comment section is, you should just proxy. Don't actually buy the real cards. Okay, well, that's nice, but number one, you didn't contribute to the conversation at all. And number two, not everyone can proxy.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Simple as that.
Yeah. That conversation is really tough, especially because with everything that's happened over the past 2 years, people playing from home over webcam, proxying has been the mainstay of how people have been able to get into the format. And then, but now we have, you know, the stores are opening back up. MTG Vegas is coming up. So these are things that are happening that don't allow proxies. They're not proxy friendly environments. And now we have to really be cognizant of, okay, the cost of decks skyrocketed astronomically because all these reserve list cards, right? They all went through these gigantic spikes in price. And now we're reeling back because we want to play in person, right? We want to be with our friends, and our friends, you know, don't want to see you time twist their hands away. And so, right. And so,
or actually get to pick up your deck for a Praetor's Grasp. Oh, yeah. What a time. Yeah. What a time to be alive. I don't have to DM you my deck. It's so great. I love it.
Oh, resolving Praetor's Grasp opposition agent in real life is amazing. Oh my gosh.
It's so great, isn't it? Gilded Drake. Oh, I can actually pick up your commander and just do stuff with it instead. Just actually like, it's like crack. It's so good. I absolutely love it.
Oh man, I can't wait to play Terra Grid. Anyways, yeah. So like this, you know, this idea of real life cards, and then brings back to the fold the conversation of how expensive are these cards. Like, I can't tell you, when I looked at the cost of Grim Monolith, and I bought that card for $50, and I thought, man, this is really expensive for what it does. And then seeing where it costs now, I would never pay that. Like, if I had to buy that card now, I would never buy it. I'm like, this card just never going into my deck ever.
Oh, it's so expensive. Not to mention that there will be people that said, oh, I wish I would have bought it at $300. It's $1,000 now. That will happen. That will inevitably happen. Grim Monolith reserve list buyout coming any day now. So, yeah. Like, at the time of this recording, Grim Monolith, I think, is $350 or something ridiculous. Yeah. It's so bad. And it's going to get more and more expensive. And so, anyway, we could talk about this all day long. It could deserve its own podcast. So,
yeah. So let's see. So when looking at the guidelines, right, and really trying to stick to what some of the individuals who are making their decks, some of the barriers are going to face, I really want to talk about what's the main strategy, and is it achievable on a budget, right? Right now in CEDH, one of the most common strategies to win are going to be, wow, there's so many of them. Underworld Breach is a good example, right? To make that line work, you need Lion's Eye Diamond, and Lion's Eye Diamond is like $600.
So expensive. Oh man.
It's the most expensive way to discard your entire hand. It's just
imagine it's more expensive than one with nothing. It's crazy.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. You know, and like, so there's so many strategies that rely on such expensive cards to really work. And so when you're making your deck and you're trying to figure out, is this strategy that I want to use achievable? It's really good to know that there are substitutes for most combos that you find in decks. And you don't have to build too aggressively or look too aggressively to find what those replacement cards are, but you have to know that some of those key ones, like Underworld Breach, require quite a bit of work to make it do the same thing that you see in other competitive decks.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And, you know, making sure that your main strategy is achievable on a budget is important. So the reason being is that there are things out there where the win con is something like a time twister loop. Okay, well, you know, that's obviously not in our budget. We're not going to be able to twister loop. There are budget alternatives to that. Just make sure that that's something that is achievable within the budget. But there are some where they just suffer a little too much from the restrictions of the budget. So you're not going to be able to play some of those as a result. So Underworld Breach, it's doable. You know, it's absolutely doable. You could just do it with a Lotus Petal instead. It just takes more to do it, is all. You have to kind of, you have to escape more cards to get that system going to cast something like your Brain Freeze from your graveyard. That doesn't mean it's not doable, and it's definitely easier with a Lion's Eye Diamond, but you have to think about how your strategy might suffer because of it. And so there are some that just aren't feasible, and there's some that are just a little bit more hard. Like, for example, Wheel of Fortune plus, you know, things like Underworld Breach, you know, and Lion's Eye Diamond. Wheel of Fortune's really expensive. Lion's Eye Diamond's really expensive. So on and so on and so forth. You know, that's basically what we're trying to get at here. We don't want to, you know, try and marry a strategy that is just going to suffer way too much by the restrictions of the budget. There are plenty of great strategies out there that do not have huge budgets. And we'll actually talk about some of those tonight.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. When in doubt, take notes from the Pauper CEDH community, because they have lots of infinite combos and they're all using commons. So
and they're using commons, just so we are all heard that right. They're
only
using
commons,
common card, only commons, not even uncommons. Those are the special ones that they reserve.
That's just their commander. That's it. That's all.
That's the only thing that's allowed to have a silver icon. That's the only one.
Yeah,
and they can actually have some very formidable things. And so it's important to know that budget does not necessarily equal the difference between winning and losing in all cases. It does in some, and I'm not going to try and pretend like it doesn't. It does in some cases. It makes your decks more consistent. It makes them, you know, it makes them more efficient, makes them faster. We get that. We all know that. We're CEDH players. But that's not to say that that's the only thing you can do. So it's important to note that, you know, your main strategy is achievable on a budget.
Absolutely.
So the next thing that we want to mention as far as guidelines goes is whether or not the deck and strategy can grow as your budget grows, because you might spend $100 on the deck to start. You know, I'm going to do the $100 version, and that's all I'm ever going to do ever. I'm never going to touch it again. We know that's not how Magic works. I wish it was, but my bank account would beg to differ big time. So we absolutely want something that can grow as your budget grows. You're going to get more money to get more cards. Maybe you crack something at a pre-release and it's great and you were able to trade it in for something much better. But you want to make sure that your strategy can actually allow for that growth and isn't too inhibited by the idea that you can't do that. Now, that's not actually that hard of a guideline, because like you can just do generic upgrades in a lot of things and be able to do that. But maybe something like a really, really convoluted combo, you know, when you're trying to upgrade certain things, it becomes a little bit more clunky because you're adding some efficiencies somewhere else. And then you're kind of creating a conflict of interest or something along those lines.
Yeah, absolutely. The idea that your strategy is going to evolve as cards come out and you find yourself in an opportunity where you can trade some cards to get the one expensive card. For me, getting into CEDH and becoming really involved with the community, the one thing that I actually ended up doing was I traded my entire collection for like 30 cards, something like that. And it was 25,000 cards in my collection. I had boxes and boxes and boxes. And like, that hurt my heart. It did hurt my heart. But, what I got was the upgrades that I've been looking for. And I am a firm believer that you really want to try and play what you want to play. If you want to play CEDH, play it. That's fine. And my friends were into that, and I was like, let's go there. And so the strategies that I wanted in my deck involved cards that I simply could never afford. I simply could never afford them. And I'd been playing Magic since 2009, so my collection was large, and it had cards from OG Zendikar. And those cards over time, even the uncommons had gotten expensive. Expedition Map had gotten expensive, and I had like 30 of them. And so I had to really make that decision of what I did for me personally. And then I was able to get the cards that I wanted to do the strategies that I wanted to do. But before then, I was literally like, what's a cool strategy? Oh, look at this Ghostly Flicker card does something really, really nice with this Archaeomancer. Like, that's cool. And they're both commons, and I can go infinite with that. And for me, that was a long time I was doing stuff like that. So, very, very difficult to do in terms of, when you're making that first strategy and it uses a card that you can't afford, but you find a replacement and then eventually you upgrade because Magic is addicting like that.
Yes, it is. Very much so.
Absolutely.
But the Archaeomancer strategy is actually a perfect example. You might be in a situation where this strategy is really, really good for what your budget is, and you can maybe assemble something like a 3-card combo or something like that. But then as your strategy is evolving or your budget is evolving and things like that, you might find that your swaps and stuff like that are making your Archaeomancer strategy just a little bit more clunky. And so you might find yourself saying, okay, well, now I have to swap out the Archaeomancer strategy to put in something else because that happened. But what I've realized is that I have all of these other cards that supported Archaeomancer in the process. So now I'm not upgrading 1, 2, or 3 cards. I'm upgrading 10, 11, 12 cards. And then that's becoming a much more clunky process. So keeping things like your core strategies affordable and keeping them as efficient as possible, spreading them out amongst 4, 5, 6 cards or something like that with all the support cards in it. Suddenly you have this situation where maybe making one upgrade will force you to have to make 5, 6, 7 upgrades. So be very, very cognizant of that when you're thinking about starting these things on budgets.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. And what's really cool about doing this is that you can learn a little bit more of, you might think of a really cool combo that just doesn't quite do what you need it to do. It's not consistent enough. You don't have enough ways to assemble it. And I think that's really important when you're looking at budget decks versus budgetless decks, because we then shift to the idea of, can this compete at a budgetless meta, right? Can that happen? And I think that for me, having this deck that I spent so much time on, my original Selvala deck, thinking like, oh, this is so cool. I'm looping acidic slime because I hate friends.
Acidic slime. Don't attack me. It's got death touch. Careful now. Careful. It's got death touch.
Temur Sabretooth can bounce it back to my hand and I can replay it to destroy your lands. Oh my gosh. I got hated at my tables. But then for me at that time, Teferi was running rampant, just doing all the infinite stasis things. But that deck would go infinite, and I would have my Selvala budget deck, not knowing, oh wow, I'm feeling so outpaced. Let's find ways to tune this deck so it can compete, even though I don't have the money at the time ever to make this deck look the way I want it to look. And I think that was so important. Really understanding what a budgetless meta looks like and how those cards impact the speed of the game. And by the way, if you're looking to get into CEDH, this is a great time at this moment because Stacks is so cheap. Stacks are so cheap to build, and highly recommend doing that. Anyways, yeah. What about you, Ryan?
So basically, the final guideline of competing at a budgetless meta is a perfect point, because it's good and fine to build $100 decks to compete against other $100 decks, and that's fine. But really, at the end of the day, you want to play CEDH with everyone else. You don't want to just be restricted to be like, hey guys, do you have a $100 deck on you? Because if so, then this 100 cards that I have in my, my backpack is useless. No, we want something that can play at other tables too. We want the strategies to still be able to compete, at least hold their own at a CDH meta, regardless of budget. You know, that's really one of the biggest keys, in my opinion. Yeah, you can build a $10 CDH deck or try to, but if it can't compete at another CDH table, number one, you're going to feel bad. Number two, you're going to make everybody else at the table feel bad too, because you were just sitting there like a boat anchor the entire game. and CDH is about cooperation, forging allies, and breaking the alliances, and that's a big part of CEDH. And if you're just sitting there saying, "Oh, tap land pass," and then the person to your left just won, people are gonna get salty with you. It's the nature of the game. I wish it was not like that, but it is. But that doesn't mean that you can't still play on a budget. But that budget needs to be able to lend itself to being able to compete at a budgetless meta or a budgetless table. We don't want it to only compete within this little vacuum. We want it to compete with all the big boys, if you will.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about a couple of things that lend themselves to budgets to give an idea of frame here. So the first one that we want to talk about is a lower color identity in your commander/deck. Building 5-color commanders is great because you can build with every card that's legal, and you can do so many cool things with with Kenrith and with all these different things, and Golos, Rip, and but unfortunately, one of the biggest killers of budget is your mana base.
Yes.
Duels, shocks, fetches, pain lands, all of these different things. It's one of the most expensive things about a deck. We talked about LEDs and time twisters, and yeah, those are expensive. But if you look at kind of holistic overviews of the groupings of cards on things like Moxfield and stuff, usually the number one is your land base. Mm-hmm. It's always the biggest chunk of your budget. And having a lower color identity will lend itself to not having to suck up as much of your budget on the mana base itself, freeing yourself up to be much more efficient in other areas of your deck, like better interaction or more compact win conditions or more consistency through something like Tutors, and not having to make sure that, I sucked up all my budget on a plateau. And now I have like no money for anything else. Okay, well that's not going to make your deck better. It's not going to make your deck a CEDH deck by putting a plateau in there, So not having to limit yourself to really bad mana bases by a 5-color commander, and instead maybe starting with a lower color commander, will be very beneficial in freeing up your budget to do the things you want to do at a CEDH table.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Those low mana bases. Oh my gosh. As the brewer of Kenrith Evolution,
5 colors.
Yeah, it hurt. It hurt to make that deck. So when you look at decks that have lower colors in them, yes, the cost of your mana base goes way down. The things that I look at, and especially, I'm going to always come back to Selvala because I know so much about this deck. So when Opposition Agent got printed, one of the big moves that deck specifically did, Brostorm, they took out all the fetches. So there is no fetches in Selvala Brostorm. And if you take out Gaia's Cradle, that mana base is just forests.
Yeah, maybe snow covered.
Maybe snow covered if we want to run Mouth of Ranum, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Hey, you got to kill that Opposition Agent somehow.
Do something, right?
The opportunity cost is so low. It's so good. Yeah,
exactly. So it's stuff like that. So you get the opportunity to not actually have to run these expensive lands that make the deck essentially more efficient. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But the big thing here is that your mana rocks, that Mox Diamond, right? That's such an expensive card, and it does something very specific. Even cards cards I'm seeing a lot more of, like Springleaf Drum. That card I love that card. I think that card is really, really good. And that had, for me, in decks that I play, Thrasios, has been just an instant slot in. like, oh, this card's going in here. I can now tap Thrasios. I don't ever want to attack with Thrasios because it's always a blocker. It always blocks Timna. It's like, hey, I'm blocking you, bud. But it's so important, right? Because these mana bases, they really take a lot of your budget away, because they're not interaction, they're not grind, they're just the basic mechanics, the fundamental of how you play Magic, which is pay for stuff using mana, which is created by these mana bases. And I think that's tough. And thinking about like the guidelines, you have these mana bases which kill your budget, but also you really want to make sure you have strategies that don't rely heavily on expensive cards. Like,
yep.
Like you can't, if you are, I want to make a Time Twister deck. Time Twister is like $5,000. The card is so expensive.
I wish it was $5,000.
Oh
it's like, God. It's a big number. Let's just say that it's not a budget friendly card. Let's just leave it at that.
It is. So. Jeez, not a budget friendly card at all. It makes me cry a little bit. That card's legal.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you have these strategies. There are so many. In fact, there are so many. I heard of a new one today. And thinking about where that strategy came from was, I want to have a deck that does something unique in a color that we haven't seen before, do this unique thing. And, I also don't want to run really expensive cards. And I play tested it a few times and I was like, this is doing things. I'm liking this.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. So the idea that your strategies can't rely on heavily expensive cards is, it's not as difficult as one might think it is. We see Lion's Eye Diamond in so many things, and we keep going back to that because it's so ubiquitous in our format. And for good reason. It's a fantastic card. It's very powerful, especially with things like Underworld Breach. But you want to make sure that these types of things are not the keys to your win. So it kind of goes back to, like you said, what can we do? Is it achievable on a budget? Underworld Breach is achievable on a budget, but something that like maybe a Razaketh line or something like that relies on LED in order to win, that one's not going to work out for you. Now, that's not to say you can't use Razaketh, because Razaketh does have lines that doesn't require LED. It's a lot more efficient with LED, which is why people run it, but it absolutely requires more work, more setup, more board state in order to work without LED. The Razaketh lifelines are super hyper efficient and compact because LED is there. So you have to sacrifice a little bit in order to make that work with your strategy. That's not to say that it doesn't. That just says that you have to work within what you have with you. So let's talk about some example win cons. Let's start putting some rubber to the road here. We've talked about some strategies, maybe a little bit longer than we should have, but whatever. Yeah, let's actually talk about some things that do lend themselves to budgets. And some of these might surprise some people because they're like, wait a minute, those are all in all the budget lists, $5,000+ deck lists. Why are these win cons considered budget? And if you look at the prices of these, they actually are quite affordable. The first one we're going to talk about, it's the number one in the format. It's the Thoracle Wincon. And you're like, what? There's no way. Isn't Tainted Pact like 50? Oh, no, it's not. It got reprinted. So the Thoracle Wincon is obviously, for those of you who don't know, which is I think 2 of you. I appreciate you 2 new listeners. I appreciate you. So Thoracle enters the battlefield, trigger on the stack. You exile your library through one of 2 different spells, one being Demonic Consultation, the other one being Tainted Pact. So Thoracle, I think, is like up to $8 at the time of this recording. She was like $2 when she was still in print. She's already going up. Grab your copies now. She's going to get more and more expensive until she gets banned out of every format there is. She's so good. Whatever. She's so good. She's so good.
So good.
So, she's like $8 at the time of this recording. Like Tainted Pack is $20. Demonic Consultations like $20. We're talking less than $50 for one of the best win cons in this entire format. Now, if you're on a $100 budget, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to make that, win con work. But if you're on something like $200, $300, $400, $500 budget, it's not hard at all to put Thoracle consult into your Wincon package. And this Wincon is the Wincon that wins the majority of CEDH games. So you're absolutely well positioned by just putting Thoracle in there to be able to compete at a CEDH table, at least from a Wincon perspective. I'm not going to say these 3 cards make every CEDH deck. But the other thing I do want to say is that you have to be aware of the land base when it comes to Tainted Pact. So there is a bit of a caveat there. And this is one of those things that we talked about earlier. Can your strategy grow as your budget grows? Now, that's not to say you can't have a Tainted Pact land base, because Tainted Pact requires every card to be unique, including your basic lands. It just means that you have to be a little bit more cognizant of it. That doesn't mean that you have to run Tainted Pact. You can just run Consult. That's fine too.
Yeah, the Thoracle is really interesting because you just need another card that can exile your library or get rid of your library. And there's a ton of cards that can do that. I immediately think of like Thought Lash, or like there's a lot of budget friendly cards that you can use to upgrade. We were talking about upgrades earlier, to upgrade to Tainted Pact, when you have a little bit more freedom. And there's a lot of combos that can combo with Thoracle. The reason why Thoracle is so good is it just needs to enter the battlefield. That's it. That's all you need to do.
It has to resolve. It has to resolve, pretty much.
And it's so hard to deal with. It's such a good Wincon. That's why it's so boring. But that's it does what it needs to do. And you have Labman and Jace as well. And those are equal options, and you could run a deck with those 3 cards and ways to exile your library, and that deck will do very well. Yeah, in any meta.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good shout out. The Laboratory Maniac, Jace, Wielder of Mysteries, those are still perfectly viable strategies. And obviously they got pushed out for efficiency's sake by Thoracle, but that doesn't mean that you can't run them too. Gush is not a $100 card. Gitaxian Probe is not a $100 card. Empty your library, cast one of those with 2 life or returning 2 islands, and you've won the game. So they're still perfectly viable strategies, and they're super affordable too.
And nothing puts hair on your chest like playing a Laboratory Maniac and trying to draw from an empty library. Just like, brainstorm empty librry. Anyone gonna kill Jace?
And they're like, yeah, you chain of vapor. You're like, no. Which is why Thoracle is better. It doesn't matter,
Yeah. So. Speaking of cards that put hair on your chest, listen, World Gorger Dragon. Okay.
Near and dear to my heart. Go ahead,
Ryan. Listen, I know World Gorger Dragon is bae. It's bae. I know.
It's such a. I love that super fragile jinky combo.
So World Gorger Dragon loops are very inexpensive. You just need a reanimation permanent that can put World Gorger Dragon from your graveyard to the battlefield, and that's it. That's all you need. Really, really good. Very, very scary because there's one spot of interaction that removes your board forever.
It's happened many times to me.
Man. Ryan, tell us about your World Gorger Dragon. If you haven't known what Ryan does, he plays World Gorger Dragon.
I loves me some World Gorger Dragon. So first of all, so I love it because number one, it's in colors that normally doesn't have compact win conditions, and it's in Rakdos basically. So if you're running Rakdos commanders, World Gorger Dragon is really, really efficient because those colors also lend themselves to putting things in the graveyard very, very efficiently. Whether it be something like Entomb or something like Faithless Looting. It's real easy to bend things inside of those colors, and you can win turn 1 with World Gorger, turn 2 with World Gorger, and that's strong. That's super strong. Because you're talking about CEDH being it's fast, ad nauseum strategies and all this other stuff. The fact that you could still win turn 2 with World Gorger Dragon is really something. But basically, World Gorger Dragon has been climbing a price, but it's still sub $10 at the time of this recording. The reanimation auras are still kind of climbing because Animate Dead hasn't kind of been printed in a while, save for some, like, I think maybe it was in the list or something to that effect. And so it's starting to climb, but it printed in Eternal Masters, which helped increase its supply. The other two haven't been reprinted, which is Dance of the Dead and Necromancy. Necromancy was in the list recently, but you don't need all three of those. It helps for redundancy, and it is good for an upgrade path, but you just need something like maybe one or two of them to be able to execute your combo. And it's very, very efficient. You tap your land and stuff like that. You don't need some other 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 other things to make it work. You just reanimate your World Gorger Dragon and then have your outlet for whatever your infinite mana is. Absolutely fantastic. And like I said, you could have this combo for like $30. $30 for a turn 2 win capability. That's really strong.
When we looked at Thoracle, the mana cost for Thoracle is two blue and a black for which is really interesting, because for World Gorger Dragon it's actually 2 black and a colorless. If you were to do Entomb into Animate Dead, and that is, no one talks about that, and I wish they did because that's so cheap. That's so
It's very, very, very inexpensive, and it's not hard to do on a budget. Dark Ritual's not an expensive card.
No,
and Entomb has been printed enough times that it's not hard to do that either. And Modern Horizons 2 came out with Unmarked Grave. So fetch, and World Gorger's not legendary, so you can absolutely just throw that into the graveyard with no problems. So there are plenty of things out there that allow you to do this, and they're affordable. So we're not talking about something like LED where it's super expensive. We're talking about things that are very much affordable to be able to achieve.
Absolutely. Yeah. Let's see. Next on the list we had Basalt and Rings. Okay. Listen.
So Basalt Monolith and Rings of Brighthearth.
Okay. Basalt, I have a because I play Kinnan so much, Basalt Monolith has just been near and dear to my heart. But this combo is great. If you haven't used Basalt Monolith with Rings of Brighthearth, it makes infinite colorless mana by copying the Basalt Monolith's untap ability, giving you positive mana. Super great. Rings of Brighthearth, how much is that card right now?
Because of its recent printing in Commander Legends, it's dropped to sub $10.
Really?
Like, it's really affordable now. It used to be really climbing high. Like, it was like getting $30, $40, $50. Then it got printed in Commander Legends, and it dropped to like $5. And now I think it's up to like $9 or $10 as of this recording.
Wow. It's good to know. I'm going to make me a Rings of Brighthearth.
Maybe go pick up a couple of those today. So...
Yeah.
But Basalt Monolith was also climbing. It was getting to be up to like $10 before it got printed again in Double Masters. And now it's like $1, $2. It's super affordable now. So we're talking about an infinite mana outlet, both achieved through artifacts. So it can be fetched in all kinds of different ways for $10, an infinite mana sink. I mean, so infinite mana outlet, sorry, not sink, for like $10. Very affordable.
Bad. Yeah. You know? And it's funny because you could actually run all of these combos so far in a deck that has like Thrasios as a commander, and you just win. Congratulations. I actually love that. I want to see World Gorger Dragon in a Thrasios deck. I need to see that in my lifetime.
I used to have one, actually. You can go on to the earlier episodes of Playing with Power. Very first season, I had Thrasios, Vial Smasher, World Gorger Dragon. Because you would sink it into Thrasios. You'd sink the infinite mana to Thrasios, draw your deck.
Yeah. Okay, Ryan. Beautiful. You have my attention. I'm going to be looking at Moxfield later like, what is this Thrasios list you were talking about earlier?
What is this hot garbage deck he played on the channel 2 years ago? This is an awful deck. I think there is one other thing to probably make mention here, and you're like, hey, World Gorger Dragon doesn't win you the game. Basalt and Rings doesn't win you the game. What are you talking about? Thoracle wins you the game. These aren't Wincons. If you have infinite mana in CEDH, a lot of times that usually can translate pretty easily to a win. It's usually the kind of the ringer, if you will, of whether or not you're going to close that game out is whether or not you're achieving infinite mana. You know, in any number of examples, you're like, okay, I'd like to present a loop. And then you literally just cast any number of the outlets that you might have. You gave the example of Thrasios. That's a very easy and ubiquitous one. But there's a ton of other infinite mana things. Oh, I'll just cast Walking Ballista for like 1 million and just machine gun the table and win. Having infinite mana is usually what will help close you out the game. Does it close out every game? Of course not. But usually when you've got it, people are already scooping up their boards. They're like, yeah, next game. All right, when you have it, okay, you got it. So
Exactly. Let's see. Man, this list is great. So I'm just so happy about it. It hits on all cylinders. So commander-based combos. Listen, there are so many of them. For this specific example, with Niv and Curiosity, both Niv and Curiosity are very, very inexpensive.
Yep.
Oh gosh, do you want to explain Niv and Curiosity?
So basically you have a couple of different Niv Mizzets available to you that win with a Curiosity combo. First, there is the original Niv Mizzet, the Firemind, and then the one that has become much more prevalent in today's modern CEDH metas is Niv Mizzet Perun. Can't be countered, and basically it does the same thing. If you draw a card, you get to ping, you get to draw a card, and so on and so forth. And basically, once that thing triggers once, you've pretty much won the game. Yes, you have to something library size and whatnot, but you absolutely can achieve that. Now, Niv Mizzet Perun, pretty sure it's like sub $10. I need to double check on the price, but we're not talking $100 here. Curiosity is like a quarter. It's like it costs like nothing. It costs like no money at all. But like these commander-centric infinite combos / Wincons are super great too, because you have half of your combo in the command zone. A lot of them are very inexpensive. You mentioned earlier Kinnan plus Basalt. Kinnan plus Basalt just is infinite mana. Simple as that. Just it's sitting in your command zone, ready to go. And it's so easy to achieve those two to, like we said, create infinite mana and win the game. Because once you have infinite, it's pretty easy to just close out the game after that.
Yeah. By the way, Kinnan is $5, and that. Whew. Yeah, there you go.
A crisp Lincoln for Kinnan Basalt. Yeah, it's fine with me. Yeah, that's okay.
Absolutely. When you look at Niv and Curiosity, it's such a good example of one card win cons. When I say one card win cons, I mean you just need one card from your 99 and your commander to win. So few commanders have that opportunity, but there are a lot of them that exist. And I think when you're looking at what we were talking about earlier in terms of using strategies that don't use expensive cards, you can make a budget deck that runs Niv and Curiosity. There's a lot of cards in Niv that are really, really cheap because no one runs Gush. Right? Yeah. And you actually want all of these cards that are free to cast because you're drawing so many cards. So in Niv, you can play so many cards that are so cheap that not a lot of people play to begin with. Cards like Thwart, right? Cards like Foil. Oh my gosh, Foil. It's Force of Will, but way harder to cast. But because you're drawing, you're drawing so many cards that you really don't care. And on a budget, I feel Niv is such a good deck to build because has all of these things. It has low mana cost. It has low color values. It has cards that not a lot of people run, and so they're usually cheap. It has Curiosity as a win con, so it checks off so many boxes here for sure.
Absolutely, and I love that you brought up Foil. Foil is a fantastic budget card, and people are like, "Oh, you have to discard 2 cards to do this and that. That's a horrible card." It's free counter magic. It's free. We're talking Force of Will levels of interaction here. Is it as good as Force of Will? Don't be crazy. Of course it's not as good as Force of Will. We're not claiming that it's good as Force of Will, but you're trying to do this on a budget. You better believe that Foil is a really good card for you. And it goes really well into something like Niv Mizzet. And Niv Mizzet is very budget friendly. You can easily achieve a competitively viable Niv Mizzet deck for $100. Because what's the actual combo? Niv, which is, like I said, $5-ish to $10-ish dollars. Curiosity, which is sub $1. And you're off to the races. Like, even the other redundant ones aren't that expensive. Tandem Lookout's like a quarter. And Ophidian Eye, because of its limited printing, is only a couple of dollars. So we're talking like sub $20, you have your commander and your Wincon, and you're just filling it out with just all kinds of interaction.
Yep.
You know, maybe a little bit of ramp or something like that, maybe a little bit of fixing, but nothing so crazy that you're like, there's no way I can compete. Niv is fantastic. And it's cards like Foil that are still affordable that help enable Niv beyond just the combo itself.
Exactly. 100%. So good. So
Yes.
good. So Ryan, good sir, do we have any budget decks that you think we should mention?
Oh, we have all kinds of budget decks that I think we should mention. So a couple of things. First of all, we are going to mention a couple of tips and tricks here at the end, but one of the places that we definitely want to recommend to everybody is budgetbrews.club. It is run by a number of wonderful people in this community that allow you to find resources, tips, and example decks that are on budgets. Now, their starting budget is roughly $500, but they also go to things like $700 and $1,000. We, at Playing with Power, have multiple decks that are at $100 budgets, and so it's super easy to take our maybe $100 starter and budgetbrews.club's $500 starters, find maybe a bridge in the middle in there somewhere, and get to where you might need your budget to be, depending on where that might start. It also provides pretty easy upgrade paths for you as well, and we'll talk about upgrade paths in here in just a second. But the first one that I want to start with is Godo Bandit Warlord.
Okay.
Because it has to be in every single episode, no matter what, or we'll have to shut down the podcast.
Yes.
So, Godo Bandit Warlord isn't even on our show notes. I'm just weaseling it in, and Alex just has to deal with it. So, Godo Bandit Warlord's base combo is sub $20 because, like you said, Alex, it is, you know, a one card win condition. Cast your commander, find your combo piece with your commander, cast the combo piece, win the game. A lot of the things that make Godo super, super fast are expensive. Absolutely. Things like your Grim Monoliths, your Mox Diamonds, and your Chrome Moxes and things like that, they are expensive cards. Absolutely. But there are plenty of ways that you can make Godo work on a $100 budget, a $500 budget, any of those, that doesn't have to be multiple thousands of dollars. I was able to, in one of our $100 budget episodes, win with Godo, turn one, $100 budget. It is absolutely doable. And the cards that make Godo work, make him function, and make him fast, yes, those mana rocks are pricey, but a lot of the other stuff isn't. Magnetic Theft is not a $100 card, you know, and it can make you win with Godo so quickly. Treasonous Ogre, kind of the MVP of that deck, is like sub $5, super affordable, and you can win turn one with it if you just power it out. Rituals, you know, they're sub $1. All of these different things that make Godo super quick. And it fits a lot of our criteria here. Low color identity, so the mana base is super affordable. It can absolutely grow as your budget grows. You know, if you want to really marry Godo and really go all in on it, which I highly recommend, you can absolutely upgrade things like better mana rocks over time, or more expensive interaction over time, and things like that. Things like your Dockside Extortionists and things along those lines that really boost him forward and make him more powerful. And it can absolutely compete at a budgetless meta. Godo still has the ability to win turns 1, 2, and 3 on a budget. It does it a little bit less consistently, but it still can be threatening to do that.
Godo is so good. It does exactly what you want it to do, and I think that's important. It combines all the strategies we were talking about. It has really, really cheap mana fixing. It is one color, so you literally can just run all mountains if you want to. It runs rituals that are oh my gosh, like Rite of Flame is so inexpensive. And just so many cards that you can run that really do what Godo wants to do, which is make 11 mana. And when you have a strategy that rewards making mana, you are in a great place. Decks, and that's just a philosophy that I think is really important. If your deck rewards mana, the deck is probably pretty good. And Godo does that in spades.
So the first one that we want to talk about besides Godo, because I gave it as our number 0, because I always slide it into every episode, is Yuriko. You mentioned this at the beginning of the episode. Zach's budget Yuriko deck is a $100 deck. It does actually compete at competitive tables that are budgetless. 100% budgetless against a $100 Yuriko deck, and Yuriko does put in numbers. It is such a good deck, and it has everything that we need. It has low colors, so low color identity, so it's super easy to put its mana base together. It rewards you for just doing what you want it to do. You want to play ninjas and draw cards with those ninjas and get all kinds of advantage with these ninjas. And you can run all kinds of different things that just kind of kill your opponents. Foil is a 4 CMC card. That hurts when you flip that off of Yuriko. The other ones, that can be more expensive, like Commandeer. It's not a super pricey card, but it costs like 7. Yeah. And Yuriko can absolutely use it in its budget versions. And it's very, very efficient. It cheats its commander tax. It cheats all kinds of stuff. And it's a very, very good deck. And it absolutely scales with you as your budget grows too.
Absolutely. You have so many ways to upgrade Yuriko. What's fortunate is that you don't have to... Yuriko doesn't have any mana rocks in it, really, that you have to worry about. And I've seen many CEDH builds that don't even run mana rocks. The only artifact that I've maybe see is maybe Mana Crypt, but even then, they're like, we don't necessarily need this.
Yuriko curves out perfectly. You don't want to cast a bunch of fast mana to power out something turn 1. You want to cast that 1-drop evasion creature on turn 1, and then turn 2, turn it sideways, and cheat in Yuriko on 2. It's a perfect curve. And so it really doesn't benefit a whole lot from all of this cheap mana rocks. That's not to say that those cheap mana rocks don't make Yuriko better, but it's not required for Yuriko to be good and efficient. So the next one is Gitrog, the Gitrog monster. So, the Gitrog monster is in low colors, and its combo pieces, number 1, is in the command zone. So that's great. One part of its combo is in the command zone. And the other pieces that are required for the Gitrog to win the game are like sub $5. We're talking Dakmor Salvage and some sort of discard outlet. Oblivion Crown, Wild Mongrel, Putrid Imp. These are not expensive cards. And so you're talking about a sub $5, sub $10 combo sitting right there. And the rest of it is super easy to fill out with any sort of, you have a very wide open budget. I have seen $100 Gitrog decks run double Titans. They had that much flexibility in their deck that they could take $80 of their budget and put it into 2 cards because everything else they had was so efficient. It was able to do those types of things. Is it obviously, more budget makes everything better, but the idea that Gitrog can win with this, these 2 cards and its commander and win the game is really great, quite frankly. And it was still fast. It was still formidable. It's a really, and it does everything that we wanted to do according to our guidelines.
Absolutely. Yeah, it does. It's so good. Okay. Good, sir. We mentioned Cody. Cody, I've done a lot with Cody. I've done a lot. The really cool thing about Cody is that it punishes you if you run all the 0 cost things. So you can't run Mana Crypt. You can't run those cards because it interferes with Cody trying to win. And so that alone helps. And then you can run cards that ramp with Cody a little bit differently than you might think. So cards like Dramatic Reversal in Cody are really, really good because you can activate Cody, use the mana to cast Dramatic Reversal to start the chain of cascades, and then it'll untap Cody and you can retap Cody to do another thing of shenanigans. And I think that's really, really, really cool. So easy, very, very cheap. And you can just run a lot of creatures that you want to run in the deck that make the deck really good.
We threw Cody in here on purpose to kind of give everybody a curveball. They're like, what? I thought you said 5-color was bad. And what? I thought, having all this stuff is super bad and all this, all these other things. But the thing is that if you're paying attention to the other guidelines we have, you just because you have Cody as a 5-color commander doesn't mean you have to have it be 5 colors. Now, the budget versions out there absolutely are still running all 5 colors, but that doesn't mean that that's the only way you can run it. Cody only takes 3 generic mana to cast. 3 generic. So there's no color requirements that you have to hit on a certain turn, which lends itself to having a looser mana base. You know, its activation is generic mana too. So you could technically have all colorless mana to achieve what you want to achieve. And just like you said, Cody doesn't actually lend itself to a strategy that wants you to have Mox Diamonds and Mana Crypts and things like that. So you're automatically freeing yourself up from this burden of having to spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars on things like Mana Crypts and Pact of Negations and LEDs and all this other stuff. And being able to find something like Profane Tutor, which sees no play outside of Cody anywhere, so it is a super affordable card. And so you have Cody plus Profane Tutor, go get whatever Wincon it is you want to find. You know, the only thing is you have to sack Cody, and all the interaction that allows you to sack Cody is very affordable. You know, even the 1-drop interaction. You know, Culling the Weak used to be a 50-cent card, now it's a $5 card. Yes, we know that. It's $5. It's not $50. It's not $100. It's $5. And $5 for one spell might seem like a lot for what it does, but that's still very affordable. I think a lot of people think that when you're talking about budget, that all of your cards need to cost the same amount. They all need to be sub $100 because 100 of them together equals $100 or something. That's not true. You can put the budget into the quality or the areas you need for your efficiency, and then you can fill it out with the other things. Basic lands cost nothing. They cost they're worth nothing. They are they literally throw them away in a lot of different places. You can go and your LGS will literally give them to you for free. They cost nothing. So that isn't included in your budget a lot of times. You don't have to have every card be 50 cents in order for your deck to be $50. You can absolutely have certain cards be $5 and $10 so long as they're efficient and achieve your strategy in the best way possible.
Absolutely. Well said, good sir. Well said. So, should we jump to the upgrade guide? Should we do it?
Before we do that, some people are probably wondering how in the world Cody wins the game. You're like,
it just does.
How does Cody win the game? Thassa's Oracle. How about that? How about that? That $30 win con we talked about? You can still achieve budgets without having to break you can still achieve these win cons without having to break your budget to do so. The Thoracle win con is $30. It's not expensive, and and that's perfectly achievable, and there are Cody deck lists out there. We will link a lot of these things that we talked about tonight in the description and the show notes so everyone can see that you can absolutely achieve these things on a budget. The Cody $500 budget deck list runs Tainted Pact, which means it has a unique mana base, a one-of mana base. And so it can still achieve that on a budget. Yes, it doesn't have crazy things like the duels and stuff like that, but it does have a mana base that can achieve what it needs to with Cody. So it's absolutely feasible. Okay, now, so you've found your deck, you've found your strategy, you're absolutely having a fantastic time, you're loving life, and you say, hey, I just got paid. So now I want to start upgrading. So we have a kind of a mini upgrade guide. So now that you have your budget deck and you want to kind of power up your deck because you're getting more funds or you're trading for more cards or whatever that might be. So what do we recommend for an upgrade guide? What should you focus on? What are some of the things that you might want to, do first, do second? Maybe you can deprioritize. So Alex, go ahead and kick us off. What is the first thing that we recommend you should upgrade in a budget deck?
Your lands. It's not Ryan, you said it great earlier. It's not sexy. It's not.
It's not sexy.
Yeah,
it's not sexy. You want that force of will in there. And it's so hot to cast that card the first time and you love it. It's not sexy to upgrade your lands.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah. The land base is so important. Specifically in improving your land base for decks that are reliant on 2, 3, 4 colors, literally any deck that has more than one color, your land base is going to be so important. For the majority of players, you really can't go wrong with Grixis lands. That is the majority of what we see in the current metas. And as you start upgrading your lands, you're going to see what lands you're going to be utilizing more. I know having shocks and having fetches are really important. When you're thinking about lands and you want to look at what is making your deck more efficient, shocks and fetches are really, really important. We use shocks a lot of the time because there are duels, right? They're the modern day duels. 2 life you pay, and congratulations, you have a duel. And fetches, they're also really, really great because they fix your mana bases. However, the efficiency that it adds to any one deck is only 1 or 2% per fetch, which is very, very small. And then at the highest tiers, we're trying to squeeze out every percentage of efficiency that we can. But it's not that crazy to think, oh, I don't want to add fetches right now because, Misty Rainforest is $60 or $50. And there are a lot of cards that you can add in place of a fetch. Simply just have a forest. That is a thing that is easy and is free. But yeah, upgrading your land base is going to be one of the most important things, because if you don't have the lands, you don't have the mana. If you don't have the mana, you can't play Magic.
That's right. And there's no worse feeling than being in a 2-color deck and you're saying, I'm just going to split my mana base 50-50 on basics and say, I'm set. I'm good to go. And then you open up, you get your opening hand. You say, well, if I draw one more swamp, I'll be good. And then every land you draw that game is an island. However, if you had just drawn one Polluted Delta, one Misty Rainforest, or that's a bad example because that doesn't fetch a swamp. But Misty Rainforest. I'm good at fetching. I'm good at this. I'm good at knowing what my fetches get. But just anything like that, it makes the difference. So now you can go fix your mana base by just, using your fetch land. You can get whatever you want. If you did end up getting, your Watery Grave, or, you cracked it or you traded for it or something like that, and you put it in something like Yuriko, now your fetches can go get that Watery Grave and you're all set for the rest of the game. Having that mana base, like we said, it's not sexy, and we wish that it was, but consistency is key. And so when you have this inconsistent mana base, which is why mana bases are so expensive, it's going to create more games where you're not going to be able to close it out because your mana base isn't where it should be. So you'll find that your deck, while it's not as hot because you're not doing these really cool things with these really expensive cards, you find that you're more consistent in your game plan. You're able to execute your game plan more consistently. You're finding that your mulligans don't have to be as aggressive anymore because you're not getting the right land base for what your cards are. These types of things make you win more games, which makes you want to play more, makes you, keep doing that. So yes, it's not sexy, but unfortunately, your mana base is probably the number one thing you should upgrade. And the best part about it is that, let's say you decided to disassemble Yuriko. I'm no longer on Yuriko. I want to move to Kess, for Grixis. Your mana base transfers over perfectly. Like it's you don't have these suddenly Yuriko specific cards. You have these compact Wincons, and you have this mana base that can transfer over to another deck very easily without having to say, now I have to start over from scratch. Having a mana base that's decent allows you to kind of get a jump start on that, so you don't have to start over from $0 again.
Absolutely, yeah. So we have our land base now, Ryan. It's not that sexy, but we did it. We got our lands. What do we need next? What do we need next?
Oh, let me tell you, the sexiest thing that you could possibly get. Ramp. Oh, so unbelievably. If there was a second place for most unsexy upgrades, it's probably your ramp. So you're fixing your acceleration and things like that. Now, there is a degree of sexiness. Let's see how many. Let's try and see if we can get a sexy count. Let's see how many times we say the word sexy in this podcast. But when you start to get to the super high levels, like when you're buying Mox Diamonds and stuff like that, and you're buying Chrome Moxes and things like that. But having ramp and acceleration can allow you to progress your game plan much faster in a lot of your decks. Godo is the classic example that I use for why ramp should be pretty high on the list. Because Godo can do what it needs to do very quickly. It can do it even faster with really good ramp. So you already got a certain degree of consistency that comes from just its speed and what it does inherently with some of the other budget tools. But swapping those things out for things that are even faster, you'll find that the clock and the pressure is on from an even earlier point in a lot of games. And people are even trying to mulligan to try and deal with you because you're getting so quick. But you can't do that without really good and efficient ramp. Unfortunately, a lot of those can be very expensive. We're talking Mox Diamonds, we're talking Grim Monoliths. You know, unfortunately, the days of Mana Vault being an affordable card are starting to slip away too. That card's getting more and more expensive by the day, and it's for a good reason. It's a fantastic card. But you'll see that when you have these cards in there, suddenly you find that you're powering out your strategy a turn or two earlier. A lot of times you're like, wow, I'm there already. That's crazy how quick that happened. And it's because of your ramp.
Yeah, absolutely. The ramp, man, I have a tenuous relationship with ramp. Ramp is one of the things that just get faster as you upgrade it. It turns your, a good example, Llanowar Elves. I've said Llanowar Elves a lot of this today, but turn 1 land Llanowar Elves is essentially you playing a tapped mana rock because you can't activate it until your next turn anyways. Upgrading Llanowar Elf to Mana Crypt is pretty bonkers because it makes that turn 2 Yisan a turn 1 Yisan. And having a turn 1 Yisan means you activate a turn 2 and you can propel your game plan forward by 1 turn, which is crazy good. It's so good. And so we want to make sure that when we're looking at what are the strategies that we want to implement to increase the power level of our deck, we want to think, is speed one of those things? And in some decks, speed isn't what you're trying to do. You're not trying to power out everything as fast as possible. But in other decks, that is what you're trying to do. And when those decks are in question, you are going to want to upgrade your ramp package. That's going to be just the lay of the land for sure.
Sometimes the difference between a win and a loss is 1 turn.
Yeah.
And sometimes that Mana Crypt that is unfortunately anywhere between $120 and $150, it's a lot to drop on 1 card, but then you find that you've shaved off a turn, and that turn was the difference between you winning and losing. That's when you suddenly start to realize why you replaced a 10-cent Llanowar Elves with a $150 Mana Crypt. So, yeah. And sometimes that's a tough pill to swallow. We're not saying that these are like super, these are $5 upgrades here, but this is an upgrade path that you will get a lot of bang for your buck. Once again, it translates perfectly over to a new deck if the time comes when you say, I don't want to play Yisan anymore. I want to play something like Kess. Mana Crypt, Mox Diamond, LED, Chrome Mox. These cards slot into
every deck.
Pretty much every single deck that is in CEDH. So now you have these staples and you have them forever. But you don't need them to start. But once you have them, now you're not married to a single deck. So they're really, really good to get early. Getting something like a Force of Will is great. But then you said, hey, I tried out my friend's Gitrog, and it's a blast, and I absolutely love it, and I'm Gitrog for life now. Your Force of Will that you spent so much money on, you're not using now.
Yeah.
And so now you're kind of in, you got a Fierce Guardianship, or you got a Dockside Extortionist for your Kess deck, and then you moved over to Gitrog, and now you have all these cards that you can't translate over to. Things like your mana bases and your ramp packages do translate over a lot well, because you will grow and evolve as a player, and it's good that your cards, it's good to set yourself up so that your cards can do that with you in that journey.
Absolutely. So we talk about ramp, right? Let's get into the things that people want to see.
Yeah, let's get into what everyone wishes we were telling them to do first.
Exactly, right? So interaction. Cards like Dispel. It's a very inexpensive, very good card. But Force of Will, Mana Drain, Flusterstorm, these cards are a little bit more on the pricey side. And when we look at like interaction, a lot of the people who use interaction, they primarily think of these more expensive cards: Pact of Negation, Force of Negation, Force of Will, these free interactive spells that are really, really good. And as you upgrade your interaction suite, you're definitely going to want to push into those cards. But I would say on this list so far, of the things that you need to upgrade immediately, this can actually kind of take a backseat because these are colored spells now. You can't put these cards in every deck. If you made a mono blue deck and then you want to play Gitrog, it's going to be really hard to translate anything into that deck. So what are your takes on interaction?
So you're exactly right. The ability to be able to interact in a format as fast as this, that wants to be ready to go by turns 1, 2, and 3, having that free interaction is so important, and that low cost interaction is so important. So when you have Force of Will, Force of Negation, Fierce Guardianship, Deadly Rollick even. I mean, I know that's not a super expensive card, but it's, you start with Doomblade and you move your way up to the $5 and $10 cards.
Yes. Yeah.
You want to have these cards that have this ability to be able to save resources for progressing your own game plan while still being able to interact with other people's game plan. And these are the sexy things. Like there's nothing better than swapping out your counterspell for a mana drain. It's so amazing. You can't wait to counter somebody's spell, even if it's not the spell you should counter, so get it out of your system. You just really wanted to cast that mana drain for the first time. Exactly. And with its reprintings in Iconic Masters and then in Commander Legends, we now see mana drain being, I'm not going to say it's affordable. It's still an expensive card, but it's no longer an unobtainable card because at least the supply is there now. It's not from Legends and it's never out there. No one's ever selling them. We have the supply. Yes, the price is high, but it's still there. Same thing with Force of Will. It was printed at Alliances at Uncommon and it just was so unbelievably expensive. Everyone was running it as a 4-of and Legacy, so it's just supply was so low, but we've seen reprintings of it in Double Masters and Eternal Masters and other things. And now we have the supply to be able to match this. And these are great cards to run. There's a reason they're so expensive. And having good interaction is so important to your game plan. This is why we talked about foil. Foil, yes, it's horrible trade-offs as far as resources go, but it's free interaction. You can interact with somebody's potential turn 1 win at a budgetless deck, at a budgetless table with your budget deck. Yes, it sucks to have to pitch so many cards to do it, but you can do it. And the ability to do that with Force of Will is so much better. 1 card and 1 life versus 2 cards. One of has to be an island, blah, blah, blah. But interaction is so unbelievably important in CEDH that yes, you need to spend the money to be able to make sure that you're competing properly at the tables. And the better the interaction, the more expensive it is, unfortunately. And that's just the nature of it. But it is good to get better interaction. Like you said, this is a little harder to translate, unlike mana bases and ramp. You are a little bit more marrying in. However, blue is very ubiquitous, so if you're getting blue interaction, you're really not in this sunk cost kind of world because there's probably going to be other blue decks you're going to play. They're usually going to hold their value so you can trade them very easily. They're high demand cards, so things like Mana Drain and Force of Will, you're never going to have trouble finding somebody who wants to trade for those. So even in that aspect, which is not an aspect we even talked about tonight, you're usually in a really good spot when you're buying this type of interaction or upgrading to this type of interaction.
Absolutely. I do want to shift gears. I think Tutors are one of the most commonly sought after things, getting the cards you want out of your deck, right? Finding the most efficient ways to do that. And then also cards that you upgrade to. So clearly, you have, Demonic Tutor is probably one of the most common cards that you would see in a black deck. But there are a lot of budget friendly options for Tutors. Cards like Limdal's Vault, I think, is really, really good. And there's just a lot. And the main tutors that we see in CEDH, Vampiric Tutor, Imperial Seal, and Demonic Tutor, those cards you can upgrade to those. Imperial Seal, you don't necessarily need in your deck. It is a sorcery speed Vampiric Tutor, which is not the greatest. But it is seen because it's 1 mana to search your deck for a card. In comparison to Gamble, which is substantially cheaper, and you could discard it That would be unfortunate. A lot of the time for me, it's a Red Entomb.
Red Entomb, baby. Red Entomb.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Unless, of course, it is the World Gorger Dragon you're trying to just
then it's Red Entomb.
and then, of course, you're like, yeah, I flip, animate dead. Oh, I guess I'm just out of this game. I did the other thing I shouldn't have discarded. So that's unfortunate.
Oh, Ryan, that's so sad. That's so sad.
It happens too much.
Yeah, just please discard the World Gorger Dragon, please. Oh, animate dead.
Just let it be sexy one time. Sexy count like 1,000. Let it be sexy like one time. Discard the exact card you need. Go off. Win the game. Just do it at least once, please. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's. But yeah, that's as far as the tutors go. That's really what I'm thinking. Is just that is probably the easiest thing to upgrade. Because a lot of the cards that you want to use to tutor, you can find there are so many ways to do it. Like I said, take a page out of Pauper. They have, those are the kings and queens of using non-traditional tutor spells. Let me just transmute everything and get me there for sure.
Yeah. So, I mean, in some budget options, you might see people maybe trying to run Diabolic Tutor. Search your library for a card, but it costs 4. Mm-hmm. And then the upgrade paths are things like Demonic Tutor, like you said. Mm-hmm. You get your Grim Tutors that can get translated into Vampiric Tutors. Mm-hmm. And once again, we're seeing reprints of these cards, come up and be able to be a little bit more affordable. Not cheap. Let's make that very, very distinct. Not cheap, but the supply is more there now, and they're a little bit more affordable. They're no longer these crazy expensive cards. And having that consistency is key in a 100-card singleton format. Mm-hmm. That is why tutors are so highly valued in our format. Having the ability to turn 1 Vampiric Tutor, find what you need, is so important. 2 life means nothing when you can get the exact cards you want. Mm-hmm. It's so powerful to do that, and that's why those cards are so expensive. Vampiric Tutor was climbing up to $100 before it was, it was over $100 before it was reprinted in Eternal, and then it became reprinted in Commander Legends, which was fantastic. And I've seen it as low as $50 and $40. I'm not saying it's at that right now for those of you who are listening, but a $50 Vampiric Tutor to have that kind of consistency in your deck is really, really powerful. And like you said, that's not to say that if you don't have these super expensive cards, your deck has no consistency whatsoever. You have redundant pieces you can run. You have other more budget options. Like I said, I wouldn't necessarily recommend something like Diabolic Tutor, but I might recommend something like the Transmute series from the original Ravnica block. The ability to transmute, find something with an equal CMC, those types of things. And there's a ton of other things, too, that you can get that are still semi-affordable. A lot of people think about, forget about the mages. Trinket, Trophy, Treasure Mage, There's a lot of Wincon-based artifacts that can run that. Budget lists, Kennen, I believe, at least the last time I looked at the deck list, runs, I believe is it Trophy Mage? Mm-hmm. I believe it's Trophy Mage. Because it finds Basalt Monolith with Trophy Mage. Fabricate is not a super expensive card. I'm not saying it's cheap, but it is not super expensive. These tutors allow us to get more consistent to be able to close out our games. And so to be able to upgrade these to more efficient tutors allows you to, once again, get to where you need to go a lot faster and get that consistency that you want in CEDH.
So let's talk about some tips and tricks.
Yep. So tips and tricks. So some final things. Now you're on your budget journey. You have your upgrade guide. You've got some decks out there. What are some some stuff that you would be good to know, or things I wish I knew when I first started out, especially when doing things like budget. So we have a couple here that we feel that would be useful to everyone listening out there. So I'll go ahead and start us off. So first of all, we talk about the CEDH decklist database all the time on this podcast, on our channel. We have links. It's in our Discord. It's very ubiquitous. The CEDH decklist database is a conglomerate of a lot of different decks that you will see in the meta. It is very important to note one thing. When you click on a deck in the CEDH decklist database, the decklist database is not the curator of that deck. They are just providing a directory of information that are managed by other deck builders and pilots. Okay, so not everyone knows that, but that's important to know. The tip here to know is that the deck list database decks don't actually always reflect the real budget of a deck. The pilot of a deck will take a lot of pride in their deck. So a lot of times they will put things like, hey, I've got the foil version of Urza. Hey, I have special islands, or hey, I have a fully foiled, old border, blinged out something deck. And so when you first go into the CEDH deck list database and you say, well, I'm starting on a budget and I want an upgrade path over time, I'm going to start with Urza, Lord High Artificer, and I'm going to go look at this Urza deck. Oh my God, it's $13,000.
Yeah.
And you're like, that is not necessarily how much Urza costs. If you take a closer look at some of the Urza lists, you will see that a lot of them are actually foiled, or, they're special, foreign black border cards or something like that, that makes them an exorbitant amount of money. And that's just indicative of that individual person who built the deck, that pilot, that, that brewer, that whoever. If you want to get an accurate reflection of what a deck is on a site like Moxfield, copy the deck into your own account. They have easy links to be able to do that. And then they have a feature on a deck site like Moxfield to say update to cheapest. And all of a sudden, you will see the deck sometimes cut in half from a budget perspective. So sometimes there's a sticker shock when you first go on the deck list database and you say, oh my gosh, this is how much? Just be aware that that's not always indicative of the actual budget of a deck. That doesn't include things like HP cards or moderately played cards or things like that. So just know that going in, that those aren't always the most accurate and up-to-date prices.
Yeah. Yeah, you hit a nail on the head for sure. Copy the deck, duplicate it, and then update to cheapest. I mean, you're gonna see exactly like how much a deck will cost you. And those decks can be kind of scary when you're looking at the price tag initially. Especially, yes, a lot of those decks are very expensive. Any deck that has Time Twister in it, oh my gosh.
It's the first thing you cut. And oh, look, you saved $9,000.
Yeah.
That $12,000 deck is only $3,000. How about that?
Only $3,000.
Only $3,000.
Deposit for a car.
That's ridiculous. So expensive.
The next thing, OG duels are not the difference between winning and losing CEDH.
Ooh, it's hot take time.
Hot takes. Hot takes.
Hot take time.
There are a total of 10 duels. And even in a 5-color deck, you're not going to run all 10. That Underground Sea is optimal because it doesn't cost any life when it comes in, which is great. It also has land types on it. It's forest, or it could be, for Underground Sea specifically, it is a swamp island. Really, really cool. That's an amazing card to get, but it does not make you win faster or lose quicker. Like it does, it is just for efficiency, and you do not need OG duels. Morphic Pool is a great replacement. Does exactly the same thing. The only difference is it doesn't have an island. You can't search for it with a fetch. That's it.
That's it. Yeah, exactly. It's exactly right. And we are actually getting into a little bit into the controversial zone here. CEDH is about absolutely optimizing thing to its nth level, and there's absolutely no exceptions, and it should be absolutely this and blah 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 blah. And like, we get it. Paying 2 life for a watery grave and not paying 2 life for an Underground Sea doesn't mean you're going to lose your games. Not paying 2 life for the Underground Sea doesn't mean you're going to win all of your games. That's not how it works. There's so much more to that equation than whether or not you want to do that. Morphic Pool was the perfect example. Yes, you can't fetch it, whatever, but you're drawing your Underground Sea, $800, $900, $1,200 card, whatever that card might be, versus a $30 Morphic Pool. You are still getting the blue and the black mana you need to cast whatever it is you need to do to win that game. Underground Sea, these ridiculously expensive dual lands that were printed 3-4 times total and are on a reserve list that will never get reprinted again, I'm sorry to say, are not going to be the difference between you winning your pod and losing your pod. You need to focus more on your skill as a pilot, some of the other upgrade packages we talked about, getting more games in. Those are going to do so much more than the person that decided to drop $1,200 on their Underground Sea so they can win more games. It's as simple as that. And, and some people are going to disagree, and that's fine.
And that is fine.
Yes, and that's fine. You're allowed to disagree. That's perfectly okay. You're allowed to be wrong.
You're allowed to be wrong.
You're allowed to be wrong. Everyone's allowed to be wrong. But we're talking about such a small difference that it's not like that you can focus your efforts and time on so many things that can give you more gain. That money could go towards upgrading so many other parts of your deck. You have the full interaction suite now. You have the full, you have your full fetch suite. You have your full ramp suite for $1,200. Like, it's a ridiculously expensive card. You can do, in the example of Yuriko, you can absolutely just completely upgrade that deck to almost everything it wants to be for the price of that Underground Sea. And then you're going to, so you want one Underground Sea or a deck that can absolutely do great work and it just misses an Underground Sea. So it's not the difference between winning and losing. And I think people put way too much weight on them. Yeah. And so it's good to maybe say, I'm going to avoid this until very last, or even consider just not getting them at all.
Exactly. Yeah, 100%. Oh, speaking of lands, I love this, by the way. No matter how cheap, never use lands that enter tapped unless the reasoning is strong. Ooh, hot take. So this is really interesting. Specifically because I love the temples. Oh, I love all of the temples.
The Scry temples?
Yes. Oh, I love them so much.
I hate those cards. I hate those cards.
Oh my gosh, I can't.
They're disguised as good lands.
They are.
They're disguised as good lands.
I've had so many good so many good times with them. Anyways, so yeah, I agree here. The biggest thing that you're going to notice when you stop playing with lands that come in tapped is the speed of your deck. Land entering tapped. So this is going to hit for people who play with Evolving Wilds, and Terramorphic Expanse, right, where you're getting those basic lands, but they're coming in tapped. It really will slow down your game plan. And as you start powering up your deck, it's going to be all about consistency and be able to play the cards you want to play when you want to play them. And when you have lands that enter tapped, you can't play with those cards. That's the way it is. And reflecting to earlier, you want to be able to play as much Magic as you can. And if you don't have the lands and you can't pay for the cards to play Magic, and I think that could be a bummer. So definitely,
that's a good way to put it. It could be a bummer. Yeah,
it could be a bummer. I think about like Triomes. When Triomes got printed, in my mind, I put them in decks. I put them in CDH decks. I was like, oh, this is great because I can look for a 3-color fetchable land. That's so good. And then I tried fetching it one time and I was like, I'm over this. This is so frustrating. Everyone's winning. I can't.
First card you drew. Oh God, it's a Triumph.
Yeah.
I just time walked myself.
Yeah. I'm supposed to fetch for you. You're not supposed to show up when you want.
I'm not supposed to draw you. What are you doing here?
Get out of my hand.
Silly Triumph. Get back in my library.
Yeah. So that, for sure. That's at least for me. That's what I think about that. That's
when building on a budget, it is super tempting to put in tap lands to save money. Those like the Thornwind Falls or whatever those those green blue lands or whatever they might be, where they're like put them in, they gain you a life or something like that. Those tap. Run a basic land before you run those cards. You do not want any of your lands to enter tapped. You don't want any situation where you are starved on mana and the one thing you rip off the top is a tap land. You don't want any situation where, like you said, the Triumphs, they disguise themselves as good lands because it's triple, and so there's all kinds of inherent things you can do. Oh, I can fetch for these, and it's got cycling. Ooh, that's super not relevant, but whatever. But the same thing with the temples. They disguise themselves as, oh, but I can scry one from a land drop. Wow. Yeah, you also, skip your next turn, scry one. Like, ouch, that's really bad. That's not a spell I'd play.
Yeah.
You want this consistency as fast as possible, and a tap land of any kind is not going to get you there. If you have the choice of running a basic land or a tap land of any kind, you run the basic before you run the tap land.
Absolutely.
I know, 2 colors, whatever it might be, 3 colors, some other effect. It's not worth it, with very few exceptions. We have actually a specific exception we bring up, and that's the lands that will absolutely, catapult or springboard your game plan forward in a way that is not really achievable any other way. The one kind of example we use for this is Beseju, who shelters all. Yes, I would rather have my demonic consult. Well, that's a bad example. Like my ad nauseum be uncounterable. I'd rather have it be uncounterable. I'm willing to let that enter tapped to make it uncounterable. It's worth it in that aspect. But there are so few lands that actually meet that criteria. Maybe there's some fringe high-power CDH decks out there that might play Field of the Dead with a whole bunch of landfall abilities. It's okay that your Field of the Dead is entering tap because that's not necessarily what you're trying to do to win the game. It just happens to be a land that's generating you all of these zombies. The fact that it's a land is inconsequential more so than the actual get all the zombies effect out of it.
Absolutely.
So with very, very few exceptions, never play tap lands. So our very last tip is to a couple of places where you can get started. Is the one we recommend the most is budgetbrews.club. They have a Discord that has an active community of brewers. They have a plethora of amazing decks on budgets. And it's a great place to get started in budget. Even if a deck that you want that isn't on that list, you can see a lot of the resources they have available for things like budget interaction, budget mana bases, budget ramp, and just being able to help assemble a deck just based on these resources alone, or taking something like cues from other budget decks to see how they achieve some of their goals and being able to tailor it to your personal experience. They're the number one resource for budget CEDH. Hands down, full stop, end of sentence. They are absolutely an invaluable part of this community. Not just the budget community, the CEDH community. Because not everyone can play with proxies, not everyone has unlimited money, and they are one of the best ways to enter this format, in my opinion. They're so fantastic. We 100% recommend them as the first go-to place for all of your budget CEDH needs. Some other resources that we'd recommend is honestly just some of the gameplay videos we have out there. We have a playlist in the description for budget CEDH gameplay. Like you can see what these decks are actually doing in action. So a lot of people from the outside looking in say, oh, budget CEDH is just high-powered EDH. No, it's not. And I will challenge anybody who says that. If you look at some of our videos, they're pretty interactive. They're pretty cutthroat. They do some crazy stuff, and they are CEDH games through and through. And we're not just playing $100 decks against $100 decks. We have things like budget decks against budget list pods, where the rest of the pod is thousands of dollars in each of the decks, and the budget deck is still putting in numbers, and it's like on $100. So they can absolutely compete, and this gives you a good idea of some of the spells and cards that they will play in their budget versions.
So currently there are over 21,000 unique cards that are commander viable. Cards that are just so awesome, so unique. And when you think about this format, and when you think about all the tools that you have at your disposal, it can be easy to overwhelm yourself with cost and, I want to find, the best deck, and what is the best deck? And you go online and you look for that. But instead, take a look at what you have, take a look at what you like to play, and the list will come on its own. And we want to see, what are the things that you would like to have? What are some of the things you would like to see printed? What are some of the decks that you would like to see played? And what does a budget mean to you? What does $100 budget mean? What's a $50 budget? is it possible for you right now, if you wanted to make the most competitive deck that you can make, could you make it with the cards around your house? And more often than not, because you don't see certain cards played, you think those cards are bad. And that's not necessarily true. There are a lot of cards that I see never played that I think are really, really good. I mentioned it earlier. I think Lurking Predators is an amazing card. As a person who has put it in more decks than I should, I know what that card can do. In a lot of arenas, I'm known as the guy who puts Void Winnower in decks. And Void Winnower it stops games. The second it hits the battlefield, it stops games. And it doesn't have to look a certain way. It doesn't have to have a certain budget. It can be. I currently have a Dargo list that is $30, and I will play that at a CEDH table. Not a problem. And it's not about how much money you can put in a deck to try and win. It's about how creative you can be, not only as a brewer, but as a pilot. How do you solve some of the problems that having more limited card choices bring you? And I think when you put that into perspective, you are now able to do so much with the decks that you make and how you play them. For sure. Thank you for my TED Talk.
All right, cool. So with that, we're going to go ahead and start wrapping up this episode of the podcast. So a big thanks again to all of our sponsors, TCG Player, Dragon Shield, and viewers and listeners like you on Patreon. If you are watching this on YouTube, give us a comment, like the video, subscribe if you're not already a subscriber. Make sure if you're listening, give us a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or whatever your podcast aggregator is out there. You can also find us on social media like Twitter and Facebook. All links for that are in the description below.
Awesome.
All right. So with that wraps it up for this episode of the podcast. So tune in next time when we talk about our favorite format and our favorite game, Magic the Gathering. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and we will see you next time.